Okay, hey everybody, we're doing a brain injury basics class, sleep and nutrition. This is part two of a six-part series on brain injury basics. In the first class, I kind of gave an overview of things that I felt were important for neurorehabilitation. And the first thing I mentioned in that class was that in my mind, in brain healing, and in brain injury, in the brain injury population, there are two non-negotiables. And these are probably some of the toughest things to tackle, but they're also the most important. And it's sleep and nutrition. So we're going to kick it off with sleep. There's two main reasons that sleep is essential. We have something called our glymphatic system, which I know a lot of people have probably heard about, but what's really interesting about the glymphatic system is that it's something that has only been recently discovered within like the past, I guess it's 11 years now. So it's something that's really important to talk about. And it's also important to be consciously aware of our glymphatic system because it's very specific for our brain. And the other reason that sleep is so essential is because of neuroplasticity. So I'm going to explain those two in detail, and then we'll jump into nutrition. So most of us, we spend 1/3 of our lives asleep, without which we couldn't function. We have a 2-month-old at home and two other boys who for some reason, like no matter what we do, if like one kiddo is asleep, the other one wakes up. So it's like I wish we need to get like some cameras just to watch us. It's like shuffle like musical chairs at night. Um, but you really learn to appreciate sleep when you lose it, just like with anything else. It wasn't until 2013 that the glymphatic system was discovered by a Danish neuroscientist, Dr. Maken Nedergaard. And you can go on YouTube and you can watch her discuss the glymphatic system. It's really interesting. We had no idea before this why sleep was so important, specifically for the brain. And the main reason for that is that because of our glymphatic system, we have a whole garbage in, garbage out system that is highly active when we are in our best sleep. So I've shared this picture before on my Facebook page, but this is an image of the glymphatic system. It's a very intricate system of vessels, and it goes all throughout the brain. And it's involved with our ventricles. So the ventricular system. We have the lateral ventricles. We have, I believe, up to 4 ventricles that help with CSF flow. And the flow is really important, but also the flow out is extremely important. So, what the glymphatic system does is it helps carry fluid that rids the brain of waste. So, discarded proteins and things that can become toxic if they build up in our system. Those protein fragments, if they're not removed from our brain, they're better known as beta amyloid peptides, which is a diagnostic marker for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Protein clumping, it basically just takes up space, and then the neurons have difficulty communicating. So it's a real intricate system, and it's really, really neat. I'm not going to read all this in detail, but I think about it in a couple different ways, which I'll share. So after I was reading about the glymphatic system, I wanted to know, okay, well, what's the point? Like, why is it so important? Well, the reason that the glymphatic system is so important is because it helps remove waste, right? Why is it so important in a brain injury population? Well, we know in brain injury, you have increased neuroinflammation. So you have changes in the brain. And if cellular debris is not removed from the brain, then it's going to be difficult to build neuroplasticity. So this was a study that was performed in veterans, And it talked about, this is really interesting. So they did MRI. And what they looked at on this image was they looked at the perivascular space. So imagine you've got a tunnel, right? So this is the tunnel here. And then you've got the blood flow. So you've got the artery or the vein. The space in between where the lining is, or the channel, and the vasculature is the perivascular space. So it's perivenous or periarterial, depending on which vascular system you're looking at. And what this research study found was that there was an increased size in that space, which meant that there was a change in the way that the cellular debris was being removed from the body. Those patients specifically had visibly larger perivascular spaces. And what that meant was that if there was a brain injury and if there was poor sleep, then the brain and body couldn't get rid of the cellular debris, and those spaces remained larger. So it's almost like, think about it this way. It's an expansion of trash in the brain. And what they also found, which was really interesting, was that that perivascular space was larger when there was less sleep. So that's where, and Dr. Macon, I forget how to say her last name. What was it? Nettergaard. She's the one who also found out that sleep and glymphatic system, it's highly active during sleep, but this study also confirmed that. This is another study. So the sleeping brain harnessing the power of the glymphatic system through lifestyle choices. So just a quote, an important factor in the glymphatic system in the clearance pathway is the stretch of the nerves and veins in each position. So this study actually looked at, hey, is there a difference in how our brain drains, right? So because that's what we're really essentially looking for, is we're looking to see if we can get our brain to drain of the cellular debris when we sleep. And what they found was that position mattered. So I know it's hard to know like what kind of sleeper you are. For some reason, I've always been a side sleeper. I'm on the, if you're looking at the bed, on the left side of the bed, and I sleep on my right side, mostly because I'm getting pushed off of the bed by our 6-year-old. But I'm a right side sleeper. I also sometimes wake up on my back. But what they found was that if you're sleeping in a lateral position on your right side, there's increased CSF clearance. So your glymphatic system is working better when you're sleeping on your right side. So this is how I imagine it. My older brother moved to New York City when he first got into college. And I remember just, my parents are both from New York City. I never grew up in the city, but we would go visit, and just a very highly active area. And I remember hearing the story of like the New York sanitary worker strike back in the 60s. So that's how I think about the brain when there's a traumatic brain injury. So in no TBI, you have the sanitation department working as as good as it does, right? They're there to perform their job, and there's no backup. But in a TBI, what can happen is the glymphatic system can get behind. And the reason for that is just because of how metabolically active our brain is, and the neuroinflammation that follows a brain injury or a concussion or repetitive concussions. So that's why I put these pictures on here. You've got this gentleman working and making sure the streets are all clean. You can see the sidewalks are clear. There's no debris in the road. And then the picture on the right, everything's piled up. I remember actually, I think there was like a very short strike. My brother, when he was living, he lives in Brooklyn. When you have trash, it attracts rodents like rats. So it's not just the trash, right? It brings other things into the system. So what I think is also important is if you look at the glymphatic system and learn to appreciate sleep more, try to focus on your sleep and better sleep hygiene. You're stimulating your glymphatic system, but you're also reducing the chance for repetitive neuroinflammation, because when there's cellular debris in the brain, it's going to activate the immune system to create some sort of continuous response. So your immune system never really shuts down. the immune system is active via different sympathetic pathways. So this could also be a reason why you're not sleep. Maybe you can fall asleep, but you're not staying asleep at night. You're waking up at 3 a.m. and you're wired. Maybe because you're sympathetically activated from a neuroimmune response that hasn't been settled. So yeah, it's just something really to think about. And if you hadn't heard of the glymphatic system, I just recommend Googling the glymphatic system. There's so much information on it now, even though it's only been researched and discovered in the past 11 years. So just another quote about this, and I have a little sloth image on here for my people on Instagram. Hello, 5 people. Imagine your brain is generating, let me admit this person. Imagine your brain is generating all this waste and everything's working fine. Then what happens is you get a brain injury. The brain generates much more waste that it has to remove, but the system becomes plugged. That's what happens in a brain injury. Improving sleep, and this is why it's important, even though it might be difficult, is a modifiable habit that can be improved through a variety of methods. And whenever I think of sleep, I think of the sloth. Okay. So the other reason that sleep is important, besides it stimulating our glymphatic system, is because it promotes neuroplasticity. And this is a really important concept. I never really understood this because my personality is let's get in, let's do the exercise, and let's work as much as we can. Obviously, if you're too tired, then it's time to take a break, but I want to get as much out of the nervous system as I can. My mindset has shifted once I understood the concept that neurorehabilitation exercises plant the seeds for recovery, but sleep is actually what promotes growth and what promotes change in the brain. So when you do exercise, it's important to engage in the repetitive exercise. But if you are not sleeping, or if sleep is not something that you're focused on, you've got to change your mindset, because sleep is extremely important for neuronal growth. It's restorative. We can't live without good sleep. But also, if you're trying to rehab the brain, you have to sleep. Now, on another note, I mentioned this in the first class, but it's not all about only resting. You have to put in the work and then take the proper time to take a break. So it's work, rest, repeat. Work, rest, repeat over and over again. So there's some tips for improving sleep quality. A lot of these people probably already know, but sometimes we forget about it. These are the toughest months for me personally. I don't do great in the winter time. Like I could not live in a place that's dark and cold all the time, because I make a joke with my friends. I tell them that I'm solar powered, but I think we all are to a certain extent. So here are some tips for improving sleep quality, and this starts at your beginning of the day, right? These are small, tiny habits that are really important to help change the way that our brain is working. And these are through different neurochemical pathways. So the first one is view sunlight by going outside. I got a lot of this information from Dr. Andrew Huberman's podcast. So go outside and then do that again in the late afternoon prior to sunset. There's days where, especially in these winter months, you wake up, you drink your coffee, drive to work, sit inside under junk light all day, drive home, it's already dark, go inside, eat dinner, sit down, watch TV under junk light, and go to bed. That has to change. And the reason for that is there's a pathway that stimulates your cortisol levels and your melatonin levels, and it activates an area in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. But by viewing sunlight or going outside as soon as you can, if you wake up really early, you'll have to wait a little bit, but just getting a little bit of sunlight, like 5 to 10 minutes, not looking directly at it, will be a game changer for hormone patterns, neurotransmitter releases, and that circadian rhythm. If it's really cloudy, stay out there a little bit longer, but just a good key for this is don't wear sunglasses. I actually really stopped wearing sunglasses when I'm outside, unless I'm going for long runs. But yeah, I think it's really important. So the other thing is watching the sun go down. So number two, wake up at the same time each day and go to sleep when you first start to feel sleepy. This one's tricky. This one resonated with me because if anyone has kids, there's that like window when they're really tired. And if you miss that window, for some reason, they think there's some party going on that they can't miss. And this is important for your brain too, because I think everyone's brain is wired very similarly. And your brain starts to feel it. You get this little bit of rush of energy towards the end of the day, right after you start to feel sleepy, and that could keep you up extra long. So you want to start to get ready for bed when you first start to feel sleepy. I typically only drink caffeine in the morning unless I'm doing like a late workout, but avoiding caffeine within 8 to 10 hours of bedtime. If you're tired during the day, I'll talk about this in a second, try to take a nap if it's possible. Don't try to push through it by pumping your body full of caffeine. It's not the right way to try to drive production. But avoiding it the sooner you can, earlier in the day, the better. That way it's not in your system, and then you're ready for the next day. Avoiding bright lights, especially bright overhead lights between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. When they first opened our clinic a year ago, one of the guys was super pumped because they got these brand new LED lights. And I was like, oh, awesome. If you come to our clinic, most of our lights are typically turned off except for some of the side lights. And then we got like some red lights on and just some amber lightage just because junk light has been proven to be very fatiguing and metabolically fatiguing for the brain. So try to avoid those as much as you can. It can also alter your circadian rhythm. Some more tips for improving sleep quality: limit daytime naps to less than 40 minutes or don't nap at all. I think naps are important, especially if you're really tired. Dr. Huberman discusses non-sleep deep rest and yoga nidra, and I'll show you a link to that in a second. But if you're really tired and you can siesta, take a siesta, a 20-minute, a 15, 20-minute just shut down and reboot. My wife, I remember where were we? This was like a few days ago. We were traveling somewhere and she fell asleep in the car. All the boys were asleep in the back of the car, and she was asleep for like, of course, she fell asleep like 5 minutes left getting home, and she fell asleep for 5 minutes, but she woke up as soon as we pulled into the house, and she thought she was asleep for like an hour, but it was only 5 minutes. So it can really be restorative for your brain if you get some short naps in. Keep the room you sleep in cool and dark, and it's better to just layer on blankets to warm up than to pump the heat. You want to be about like 1 to 3 degrees cooler your body, in order for the brain to kind of like cool down and shut down. Avoid, oh, I must have skipped that one. Sorry. Consider using devices such as red light therapy, PEMF, grounding, and sleeping mats. These are great devices. I won't go into too much detail. I've had a lot of patients say that PEMF devices have helped them significantly, with their sleep, and with their brain recovery, and then also grounding and sleeping mats. We went to a friend's house the other day to watch the college football playoffs. He's a huge Michigan fan, and the Michigan quarterback, he dealt with a lot of anxiety, a lot of issues, and they showed a little video of him before the game take his shoes off, and he was grounding outside and then doing a meditation. I thought it was so cool to see a young rising star, a collegiate athlete doing stuff like that just to help his brain. And they won the game. So that was pretty neat. On that note too, if you can get outside and the weather permits, go outside and stand in some grass barefoot with some natural sunlight shining on you. All that's going to help with your sleep. Okay. So I first came across Dr. Andrew Huberman in 2020. I say he's one of the best things that came out of the pandemic besides my second born child. But he really helped me. I listened to pretty much all of his podcasts, and he's got some really great information. He first mentioned non-sleep deep rest protocols, and this is an actual link. I won't play it. It's a 10-minute discussion, him discussing and walking you through an NSDR protocol, and it's really great. I'll provide the link on the Facebook page, but I would highly recommend listening to this either in the middle of the day when you're exhausted and you need to take a rest, or before bed. It's 10 minutes. It's totally worth it. He's actually got a very like calming voice. it reminds me, if anyone does Brain Tap with Dr. Patrick Porter, it kind of reminds me of his voice a little bit, but it's a great, this is a free YouTube link. So highly recommend that for NSDR, non-sleep deep rest. And remember, the reason for that is to help promote restorative sleep and provide the changes in the brain to remove cellular debris and promote neuroplasticity. You can do as many exercises as you want. You can physically and mentally exhaust your body and brain, but if you are not resting, if there's no rest involved, your brain will not change. All the goodness happens in sleep. So, okay. That's sleep. So glymphatics and neuroplasticity, those are the two main reasons. I'm sure people that follow this page have lots of great recommendations on other things to do for sleep. I know sleep is challenging for a lot of people, but if you don't have some sort of protocol that you follow, then it might be worth checking into, because at the end of the day, it is our habits that dictate the way that our brain works. So if you haven't physically and mentally focused on specific sleep habits, it would be a good time to start, because it's very difficult to change the brain if you are not rested. Okay, I'll be quiet about that. Nutrition. So I broke nutrition down into 6 steps. And what I want people to remember, I had someone post something somewhere, and they said, do you even have evidence that shows that the gut changes with the brain and vice versa? And despite a lot of the research being in mice and rats, I truly believe that everything is connected in the body. So when something happens to the brain, or if something happens to the gut or anywhere else, other systems are impacted and affected. So what's really important to remember when you're looking at nutrition to help heal the brain is that the gut is impacted very shortly after the brain becomes injured. And what this research paper showed, this was a paper from this gentleman here, Banzel et al. This paper showed that intestinal permeability occurs within hours. Their number in their paper was 6 hours after brain injury. And what I have here is the little injured mouse brain, and then changes in their gut lining. So changes in the tight junction of their gut lining. This is a healthy brain, and those are tight junctions. So I just want everyone to remember this when you're focused on nutrition, because it is difficult to heal the brain if there is zero focus on the gut. And everybody's different. Everyone's going to require different nutritional protocols, etc. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to tackle, just because I don't feel like this is talked a lot about, and I worked in the hospital, and I realized that most of the time the food, well, we all know this, the food's bad. The food in the hospital is bad. There's no getting around that. You've got to, if someone has been injured and they're inpatient, anything you can do to navigate through the poor food system in the hospital, do it. But I wanted to mention the difference in formulas that are out there. A lot of our patients initially are given a formula, something like this. And I'm not trying to put down this formula. I'm just saying you have to look at the ingredients, because we're not focused on surviving at this point. Now we're focused on the brain thriving, and the brain can't thrive when it's fed junk. So just if you look at the first line in this ingredients, you see corn syrup, canola oil, milk, casein, soy protein, and the list goes on. Not everything's bad, but is there something better out there? Yes, there is. And a lot of times patients aren't told this. So the reason I'm sharing this is, if you or a loved one has had a brain injury and you're just taking whatever you're given, it's worth researching and looking for other options. Here's one great company that most of my patients take who either have a G tube, a PEG tube, or a J tube, and they need to get their nutrition via tube. This is a company called Kate Farms. And I remember asking a patient, I asked them, hey, how did you get on Kate Farms? How'd you hear about it? And they heard about it through a friend, and they were very frustrated because they were being fed something similar to this nutrition here, and the patient wasn't doing great. They were having all these GI issues, their skin was being irritated, et cetera, et cetera. So a friend reached out and said, you should switch to Kate Farms. And what she said was like, they're not going to tell you this, but you can ask for Kate Farms and insurance will cover this. For most people, some people it won't, but there's way better stuff in Kate Farms than there is in this. And there's probably some other stuff that's better out there. But I just wanted to make sure that people were aware, whatever you're given in the hospital, it's worth researching if there's other options out there. This is a good company. This is something that I would say, hey, if you're on this, I would switch to that. Okay. So that's formulas. Okay. Now foods and supplements. And I know a lot of this information people already know, but I'm just going to share some research based on what I recommend for patients. So some of these are not, there we go. Okay, so step one, there's a lot of foods to avoid. And the reason for this is if we know that the gut is injured very shortly after the brain, now we're not just dealing with a brain injury, we're also dealing with a gut injury. And one way to promote a vicious cycle of inflammation is to put foods into our body that are going to further drive inflammatory pathways, cellular excitotoxicity, et cetera, et cetera. So with leaky gut or intestinal permeability in mind, it's important to avoid specific foods. And I know that talking about some foods is difficult for some people because we are our habits, but bad oils. So things like canola oil, those are pro-inflammatory oils that are going to further drive inflammation. Fried foods, why? Well, because they're probably cooked in those bad oils. Those are going to further drive intestinal inflammation. And one thing I didn't say about this is you have a brain injury, you have neuroinflammation. So one of the first things that happens is you have an inflammatory response in your brain. If there is a change in the gut because of the brain injury, now you have inflammation in your gut. With intestinal inflammation, that can create what's called peripheral inflammation. So now you have inflammation in your body. That inflammation in your body is going to make its way up to your brain, and it's going to try to make its way through what's called the blood-brain barrier. Even though the blood-brain barrier is typically also injured within 6 hours after brain injury, it's going to find another way into the brain to further drive more brain inflammation. So if we can start to calm down the inflammatory process by the habits that we have, the foods that we put into our system, we're going to promote healing and promote wellness in the brain injury. Gluten. I remember I'm not super duper strict on gluten in a brain injury. I think it's important to avoid gluten because of the size of the protein molecules. They can become very irritating to the gut. I remember 10 years ago, I feel like 10 years ago is when like gluten was like a very hot topic. And it was like everything was being promoted gluten-free. So the reason I'm telling you this is I was walking down the aisle and I was in the cereal aisle and Fruity Pebbles was like facing me and it said gluten-free. And the reason I'm telling you this is just because it's gluten-free does not mean that it's healthy. I also had a young patient who this is because it was bad instructions. I was still learning all this, but I said, let's start going gluten-free. So he basically ate the same food, but the gluten-free version, which were just now high in sugar and had all these additives in it. So he ended up putting on like 5 or 10 pounds and he got mad at me. And so just because it's gluten-free doesn't mean that it's healthy, but there are foods that are naturally gluten-free, meats and vegetables, good meats and vegetables that will help heal the gut and heal the brain. Processed foods, it's bad stuff. It's just going to drive further inflammation. Dairy, kind of similar to gluten. It's a large protein that can be difficult to digest in a leaky gut, and it can cause further immune reactions. Going back to gluten, I remember I came across a page where this is how I think about the immune system in a brain injury. So, for instance, you can have what's called cross-reactivity. So the protein that's digested, let's say it's a gluten protein, it's digested. The immune system, which is already on high alert because of the injury, the brain and the gut injury, is going to attack that protein. But what happens is that attack, whoever is responsible for the attack, is burnt out, confused, stressed out because it's that immune cell that's been working so much. It's not sure if it's actually attacking the gluten protein or the protein that looks similar to it. So there's actually cross-reactivity found from the immune system when the immune system's turned on too high, cross-reactivity to neurological tissue like the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is an area of the brain that's responsible for balance, posture, coordination, and also linear thinking. So what you eat can literally change your brain through cross-reactivity. High sugar, with high sugar is a pro-inflammatory diet. You're going to get glycation end products. It's going to completely just change the metabolic activity. It's going to alter insulin responses. It's just going to it's going to make healing difficult. So I usually recommend staying away from high sugar products. Alcohol will literally break up and create intestinal permeability and just alter the way that the gut works. And obviously, it also has neurological effects. So I recommend avoiding alcohol. And then artificial sugars can also create similar impacts as a high sugar diet. So, and they're also usually not great for you. So, not fun, but this is step one. There's no point, and the reason I'm saying this is there's no point in taking a supplement if, like, let's say you're trying to do good things for your brain. So I'm going to take this, 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 and this, but then I'm eating this, 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 and this. You're just wasting your time and your money if you're trying to do the right thing, but you're not avoiding the bad things. So you have to avoid the bad things in order to promote a body that's going to be able to heal. Okay. So that's step one. So step one is avoiding foods that are bad for you and bad for the injured brain. Step two is hydrate. About 75% of the brain is made up of water. The water allows for electrical conduction of neurons. So if you're dehydrated, which dehydration occurs after brain injury, even as little as 2%, it can have a negative impact on the brain. Dehydration and a loss of sodium and electrolytes can cause acute changes in memory and attention. So I typically recommend hydrating with electrolytes. I use salts. I think it's really, really important for good minerals and good neuron conduction. But I had a kid, I remember this, he's actually an amazing healing story, but his diet was basically, he was 16. His diet was McDonald's and Coca-Cola. And I don't know if anyone has ever heard this comment before, but I've actually had people tell me that they think water tastes bad, which is really interesting to me because, for me, it's like, water just doesn't taste like anything unless you put salt in it. But water is extremely important. So if you are eating bad foods and you're dehydrated and you're not hydrating with water and electrolytes, it's going to be hard for your brain to heal. Okay, step three. This might be something that a lot of people have not heard of, but the reason for this in nutrition is because of the energy crisis that occurs after a brain injury. So in step three, we've got step one, remove bad foods. Step two, hydrate. Step three is address the energy crisis. And that energy crisis is the occurrence of total neurometabolic fatigue after a brain injury. And what you need to do is incorporate and promote ATP production, because ATP is the currency of the nervous system. You don't have brain energy without ATP, and creatine is a building block for that. So a lot of people may have not heard of this, but there's actually research that shows that supplementing with creatine, both through diet and through supplementation, can help improve brain function after a brain injury. So here are just some of the common foods. Most of creatine is our meat or animal-based products. Grass-fed beef is one of the best sources. Organic chicken, salmon, those are some of the best sources of creatine that you can get. I have a vegetarian vegan patient, so there's also vegan and vegetarian options that I'd like to share with you, because if that's what your dietary choice is, it's good to understand that creatine can be produced by our liver, and it's synthesized from different amino acids such as arginine, glycine, and methionine. So with arginine, there's different vegetarian sources, different dairy products like milk and cheese. There's also vegan options. Glycine, same thing. It's mostly vegetarian sources or milk and cheese. And then different vegan options. It's like seeds, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, some almonds, and then some vegetables like spinach. And then same with methionine, vegetarian source if they eat eggs. Eggs are a multivitamin. Milk or cottage cheese, which may not be appropriate for some people trying to avoid dairy, and other vegan sources. So you can get creatine through diet. However, it's probably best after a brain injury to supplement, because it's just, you're gonna, if you are an animal-based eater, you're gonna have to eat a ton of meat or a ton of pumpkin seeds or sesame seeds to get your creatine levels to where they need to be for healing. So this was an interesting paper from 2017, and it talked about the potential use of creatine supplementation following traumatic brain injury. Now, this paper, there was a lot of creatine being supplemented in order to see a neurological change. And the amount of creatine they used was 0.4 grams per kilogram. So for me, what that looks like, so it's 0.4 grams if you're in the US per 2.2 pounds. So for me, it was about 30 grams. I'm about 170 pounds, about 30 grams of creatine a day if I did my math right, which is a lot of creatine. I take like max 10 grams a day of creatine. So, of course, what that means is, you're not doing this, you know, from your brain injury for the rest of your life. The goal is to support the energy crisis, support the ATP producing pathways by supplementing with high dose creatine and then slowly tapering down. But this needs to be something that's really prescribed by your physician. I think it's important to have someone that is dedicated and following along. I usually will start low with patients and then dose up depending on how they do, stay there, and then dose back down. So 30 grams of creatine is a lot, but that's what I'm sorry, 0.4 grams per kilogram to have an impact on the nervous system after a brain injury. It's a lot of creatine. That's just supplementation on top of what you eat dietarily. But creatine has been shown to help support those pathways and help traumatic brain injury. So the reason I'm sharing this with you is a lot of people haven't heard about creatine for brain injury. When we hear creatine, we think of building muscle. Our brain is a muscle. And when our brain is injured, there is a severe energy crisis. And energy is not caffeine. The currency is ATP. In order to change energy in the brain, it needs the building blocks for ATP, such as those amino acids and creatine. Same for anoxic, for whoever just wrote that. Okay. Step 4. So just going back. Step 1, remove the bad foods. Step 2, hydrate with electrolytes. Step 3, address the energy crisis with creatine. Step 4, mitigate inflammation. Inflammation is probably the biggest hurdle to tackle when you look at brain injury. And the reason for that, and this is my opinion, it's because of the change in our barrier systems. I've mentioned our barrier systems before, but our body is built with barrier systems as protective mechanisms. We have a blood-brain barrier, a gut barrier, skin barrier, a lung barrier. But in a traumatic brain injury, there is disruption of those barrier systems. The way I described this in the first class is imagine it's a beautiful spring day and you just built this awesome screened in back porch. You're out there sipping on some turmeric tea and relaxing, enjoying a nice cool breeze, eating some blueberries, and then all of a sudden you feel a mosquito bite. That totally changes the mood. And you wonder to yourself, how did a mosquito get into my beautifully screened in porch? I'm enjoying this wonderful breezy weather. Well, there's a hole in the screen and you can't find the hole. So all these mosquitoes start flying in and all of a sudden your back porch becomes inhabitable. That's what happens when the barrier systems are broken down in my head. You've got these barrier systems that keep things serene and clean. And then all of a sudden something pokes a hole in the barrier system and you've got mosquitoes flying in, disrupting the environment and making changes. So we've got to mitigate inflammation. If inflammation becomes chronic and the body does not start to shut down the inflammatory pathways on its own, it needs to be supported. So first way to do that through diet is incorporating foods that are high in dietary polyphenols. This is from a research paper. There's different dietary polyphenol subclasses, things like flavonoids, which you can find a lot in teas, in citrus fruits, in vegetables and legumes. There's also phenolic acids, lignans, and stilbenes. So obviously, when you think of polyphenols, a lot of people probably think of resveratrol in the skin of grapes. I don't recommend drinking a bottle of wine to reduce the inflammatory pathways because I think no matter what type of alcohol you drink, it's pro-inflammatory for your gut and for your brain. But eating the right types of dietary polyphenols will promote and mitigate changes in the inflammatory pathways in your brain and in your gut. So what are polyphenols? They're plant compounds that are largely beneficial to your health. They're naturally found in plant-based foods like fruits, vegetables, herbs, teas, red wine, coffee, and dark chocolate. I had a patient yesterday, I was chatting with her, and she told me she just started her daughter on cacao, which is it's in dark chocolate. It's great for the brain, and she thinks that she's noticed a difference by giving her cacao. That's something that I hadn't really thought of, but it's a dietary polyphenol. So they act as antioxidants in the body, and this means they help protect the body, neutralize free radical production that cause damage to cells. So free radicals are released when there's cellular damage. If those free radicals stay free, then they cause a whole host of issues within the brain and the body. This was a neat paper. Again, some of the research was in mice and rats, but I found this paper a few months ago, and I went to the fridge and started eating blueberries, to be honest with you. I've never had a severe brain injury. I've had maybe 2 mild concussions playing sports growing up. But for me, it's whatever you can do to feed your brain, the better. So this is a paper from, I forget what year it's from. I think it was like 2017 or 19. Blueberry supplementation mitigates altered brain plasticity and behavior after traumatic brain injury in rats. I thought it was really interesting. What you're doing is you're eating a blueberry, and then you're changing the way that the brain works through neuroplastic pathways by stimulating nerve growth factors like BDNF, and then also changing cognitive behaviors just by diet alone. So this is why blueberries are important, right? One of the many dietary polyphenols that are important for brain injury patients. I know people know this, without looking at the research, but it's cool to see that it's in there. Okay, moving on to turmeric, because I remember when I found out something about turmeric that I hadn't known that I wish I had known because I just thought, just turmeric alone was extremely beneficial. But the key compounds in turmeric are called curcuminoids. Curcumin itself is the most active ingredient and appears to be the most important. As a polyphenol, curcumin has several advantages to health. It's a very strong antioxidant. It has anti-inflammatory, antibacterial, and antifungal properties. However, one of the greatest downfalls of curcumin is that it's not well absorbed in the body. That's what I didn't know. I thought, you just take some turmeric and you're good to go. Black pepper. So when you take black pepper with turmeric, black pepper contains the bioactive compound piperine. This is an alkaloid like capsaicin, the active component found in chili powder and in cayenne pepper. So piperine has been shown to help relieve nausea, headaches, and poor digestion, and it also has anti-inflammatory properties. Its most significant property, though, is its ability to boost the absorption of curcumin. So when I found this out, because I recommended just, a turmeric supplement, I immediately went and looked to see if there were actually supplements that included black pepper or the piperine in them. And there are supplements out there that are turmeric, piperine. They also, some of them include ginger. But turmeric has been shown in the research to have protective effects from the curcumin against traumatic brain injury. And those are mostly through the anti-inflammatory pathways. It's the inflammation that drives the further symptoms to a certain extent of brain injury. So if you can mitigate the inflammation through dietary habits and behaviors, you have a better chance of creating neuroplasticity in the system. Okay. Another potent anti-inflammatory I wanted to touch on is docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA. It's a type of omega-3 fat. I know many people have probably heard of it. Like the omega-3 fat EPA, DHA is plentiful in oily fish, such as salmon, and if you're down to try them, anchovies. If anyone eats anchovies, kudos to you. I tried one time and I couldn't do it. Maybe I'll have to revisit that. If you're a big anchovy eater, let us know who you are in the chat box. So your body can only make a small amount of DHA from other fatty acids, and you need to basically supplement with DHA. Together, DHA and EPA can help reduce inflammation and risks of chronic diseases. It's really important for brain function and eye health. So out of the omega-3s with EPA and DHA, a high DHA omega-3 is a little bit more brain specific. And DHA through anti-inflammatory pathways has been shown in rats to have a positive effect in traumatic brain injury. So most of the supplements are what I've seen. Most of the supplements, and again, there's options for people who are vegetarian or vegan, but most of the supplements that are the omega-3 fish oils, the ratios are typically higher in EPA to DHA, but you can purchase supplements that have a high DHA to EPA ratio. Just a shout out to a company that I think is easily accessible for anyone who's not a practitioner is Nordic Naturals. I think they make good products and they have a pro omega DHA that I think is great. And it doesn't taste horrible. So that's the one supplement I'll give a shout out to. Anyways, this is a great slide from a research paper, the roles of DHA in neural membranes. So it does a lot. It helps modulate gene expression, right? It helps turn on and turn off genes. It can modulate nociception. Nociception is a sensation of pain. So it can help dampen pain pathways, probably through inflammation, right? Because sometimes pain is driven through inflammatory pathways. So modulation of nociception, modulation of LTP and memory formation. LTP is long-term potentiation. So taking short-term to long-term memory, and LTP is also neurons remembering what they're supposed to do. It can help modulate neuroinflammation. It can help inhibit apoptosis, so continued neuronal death when it's not appropriate, even though it is appropriate sometimes. Inhibition of chemokine and cytokine gene expression, so shutting down inflammatory uh, modulators, and then also modulating enzymes and receptors. So if you have had a brain injury and it's appropriate for you, because one thing to remember with fish oils is that they can thin your blood. So if there was a hemorrhagic event, make sure you speak to your doctor before taking one. But if you have not looked into getting on a high DHA supplement for supportive brain health, because it's so good for the nerves in your brain, but also by promoting anti-inflammatory impacts on the brain and body, I would highly recommend it. Okay, so that's inflammation. Now, there's other things you can do to promote anti-inflammation in the system, but those are the main ones that I wanted to discuss. So, step 5. Now we get into supporting the gut. The reason we want to support the gut is because, like I mentioned earlier, the brain injury changes the gut very shortly after through different mechanisms. The majority of vagus nerve fibers, which is our 10th cranial nerve, are afferent, which means the majority of information that's traveled along the vagus nerve is coming from the body to the brain. And some research shows that it's approximately like 80 to 90% of the vagal fibers go from body to brain, and 10 to 20% go from brain to body. The reason I'm telling you this is because you can change the brain by supporting the gut when the gut is injured. And one of the best ways to do that is to eat things that are good for your gut. A lot of the foods that have been mentioned are going to be good for your gut. The reason for that is you're avoiding things that are going to further drive intestinal permeability, and now you're incorporating things that are anti-inflammatory. But we also have to specifically support the gut lining. One of the best ways to do that is by eating foods that are rich in glutamine. It's an important amino acid with many different functions in the body. It's a building block of protein, and it's critical for the immune system. As I'm sure you've heard, the majority of our immune system, it resides in the gut, but it's also modulated by brain activity. But what's more is glutamine has a special role in intestinal health. So the way I think about glutamine, you've got your intestinal lining here, right? These are the little cells. Then you have a brain injury. The brain injury causes intestinal permeability. So those cells, those tight junctions start to open up. There's a release of what's called zonulin. Zonulin's like a zipper. It helps keeps those cells together. Well, with that change in the intestinal lining, what could happen is you have a change in the way that the gut's working. By eating foods that are rich in glutamine, glutamine is like glue. So it helps kind of like glue that lining back together. That's not very scientific, but that's the way I think about incorporating glutamine into the diet. Uh, and one of the easiest ways to do that is by eating foods that are rich in it, like eggs, bone broth. People who make their own bone broth is so rich in glutamine, and it's very good for gut healing. Bone broth, I like bone broth because for patients who are reliant on a tube feed, who are currently like MPO, haven't passed their swallow study yet, using bone broth to help support the gut is really, really good. And it's very easy to put through a tube. Is that the next slide? Okay, yeah. So this is a research paper that just shows rebuilding microbiome for mitigating traumatic brain injury, the importance of restructuring the gut microbiome brain axis. What you feed your body, you feed your brain. The biggest thing is supporting pathways that are going to promote barrier healing. So we have to fix the barrier system in our gut. And the reason that's important is because we are in control of that, right? We have control over what goes into our body. We may not be able to control the symptoms of the brain injury, but if we can take responsibility and control for the foods that we're feeding our body, then that gives us the power to change the gut. If you can change the barrier integrity in your gut, it's going to drive down the inflammation, and it's going to create greater potential for brain healing because you're reducing the systemic inflammatory response. There's lots of research now on the brain gut axis and using the gut to help heal the brain. There's really great probiotics, but there's also foods that are rich in pre and probiotics that are just simple to incorporate in your daily diet. Some maybe not as accessible as others, but prebiotics like onion, soybeans, asparagus, bananas, maybe not a ton of bread, artichoke, garlic, and then things that promote probiotic health. So this is not an exhaustive list. It's just a short example of what we should be doing to help our gut heal. In summary, we've got to appreciate the changes that happen in the gut. I think by including glutamine-rich foods and then also making sure that our diet includes pre and probiotics, and then also supplementing with a probiotic or prebiotic or supplementing with glutamine can really help set the stage for further healing. Okay, last step. So this is step 6, and this is mostly just supplements. So supplementing the brain. There's lots of different supplements out there. I know that there's smart drugs and there's a ton of information on this stuff. I just wanted to share like 4 that I could recommend with confidence just because I've used them personally, and I've also seen positive changes in patients when they take these 4 different supplements. So the first one is MCT oil. And I want to give a shout out to one of my patients in Canada. I had the opportunity to visit them in person, and he's made a remarkable recovery with his brain injury. To this day, I'm just blown away with his recovery. And part of the reason I believe his recovery has been so astounding is because his wife is truly amazing, and she makes sure that he is eating all the right foods, but also when he's drinking coffee, he's drinking really, really, really brain-powered coffee. Like her coffee is better than most of like the neurohacker stuff I've seen on social media. One of the things she uses in her coffee is MCT oil. MCT oil is a derivative of coconut, and it's medium chain triglycerides. It's so good for the brain. This was a really interesting paper. I will say this. I started out, my personality, I'm like, I heard about this probably 10 years ago. I was like, oh yeah, MCT oil in my coffee, like, psh, psh. If you use a lot of MCT oil, you may have to make your way to the bathroom pretty quickly. Just be fully aware. I would just dose low, start very low with it. But this paper showed that the use of medium chain triglyceride oil in subjects with Alzheimer's disease, a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled crossover study with an open label, what they showed, so in the discussion section down here, you can see this is the longest duration MCT AD, Alzheimer's disease study to date. This was in 2021. 80% had stabilization or improvement in cognition. This is one of the few papers I've read where it's a large number, like 80%, and a better response with 9-month continual MCT oil. So incorporating MCT oils into the diet can help feed the brain and help change the brain through tons of different neurological pathways. Okay, the next one. Some people probably heard of it, may not have taken it. I've personally taken it. I like it. This kind of falls into the category of nootropics. but this is lion's mane. So, which it looks like kind of a furry little animal that you'd want to pet, but that's like the mushroom. So what this paper showed, which it doesn't have lion's mane in the name, but I think that's the medical name for lion's mane. Anyways, they found that lion's mane mushrooms may double neuron growth. So now we're looking at promoting neurogenesis, not just dampening inflammation, not just changing the barrier systems, but now what we're looking at doing is using dietary habits and behavior to promote neuron growth, which again, if you were a medical doctor back in the, let's say, late 1990s, early 2000s, they were still telling people that the brain stopped changing at 25 years old, and neuroplasticity wasn't really a widely accepted concept. So you can change your brain at any age, at any stage in your brain injury, no timeline required, by taking something as simple as lion's mane and improving neuronal growth. Specifically, they were looking at the hippocampus, different areas involved with memory, but it's just really neat to see that there's research going into things that are accessible, affordable, and simple to take to help change the brain. So that's lion's mane. So we got MCT oil, lion's mane, and these are just suggestions. I know this list is not exhaustive. The third one I have on here is CBD. So I know CBD has become, it was at some point very popular. I think that there's so many therapeutic effects by really turning on what's called our endocannabinoid system. It's not a system that you're taught in school. Like we learn about the nervous system, the vascular system, the hormone system. They never once taught us anything about the endocannabinoid system, but we have an inherent endocannabinoid system that is turned on by different types of foods. A lot of them I've already mentioned, but the endocannabinoid system can be very healing when it is activated for both brain and body. And one of the ways it does that is it can help mitigate the inflammation, but it can also help improve cerebral blood flow. So it can help regulate cerebral blood flow. I mentioned in the first class, brain blood flow can diminish in acute brain injury up to 50%. And you may not get that back because of lack of physical exercise, things of that nature. The brain is a gravity dependent organ that relies on constant flow of good, healthy blood to oxygenate the tissues, to remove the inflammatory mechanisms. And CBD can help do that. It can help increase neurogenesis. It can improve neurotransmitter signaling. It can help restore the blood-brain barrier. So if you haven't looked into taking CBD, I would recommend looking into it. It may not be for everybody. At first, I wasn't really interested in it. But now that I understand the therapeutic potentials of CBD, if a patient asks about it, I usually recommend it. CBD with THC can create more of a synergistic impact. I personally take just CBD. I've taken CBD oils that are high in THC, and I do not like the way they make me feel. I don't like feeling like that. So I usually just take a CBD. For me, I'll drink my coffee and I'll put CBD under my tongue, let it sit there, and then I'll take my coffee with it. So I usually take it in the morning. But the reason I wanted to share this with you is because CBD, people don't really think about this, but it can be very pro-inflammatory. So it can reduce a lot of neuroinflammation if you take it. You typically can't activate your CBD system enough after a brain injury through dietary behaviors alone. So that's why it's in the supplement recommendation. Supplementing with it 1 or 2 times a day can be very beneficial. Last but not least, magnesium. I like magnesium for so many different reasons. And I remember when I found out about magtine, which is magnesium L-threonate. Now, my understanding with magnesium is there's different forms of magnesium. You have magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate, magnesium malate, which can cross the blood-brain barrier, from my understanding. I believe to a certain extent, magnesium in any form can cross the blood-brain barrier, but recently discovered, kind of similar to our glymphatic system, in 2010, I believe, a compound known as magnesium L-threonate. It was trademarked as the name Magtine, was identified to help raise levels in the brain of magnesium and improve overall brain function. And I believe the first paper was researching neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's. That's the first paper I saw with magnesium L-threonate. I got really excited and interested. I presented it to the medical doctor I was working with doing my nurse practitioner rotations, and she's a skeptic. She was like, yeah, but this is probably like paid for by the MAG team people, which it may have been, but it was really neat to know that, there's another affordable, easily accessible option for patients who are trying to help heal their brain. So magnesium L-threonate, this is one I personally take. I take it for both brain and body. I usually take it towards the end of the day. And again, there's so many dietary sources of magnesium, but in a brain injury, it may be beneficial in the initial stages or when you're trying to make those brain changes to increase your magnesium intake with a more specific brain derived or brain focused magnesium like Magtine, Mag L-threonate, or Mag malate. And the reason for that is just like all the other things. It can improve antioxidant capacity, reduce cytokine production, which is inflammation, reduce lipid peroxidation. So can't forget about the vessels in inflammation of the vessels in the brain, down regulation of aquaporphorin 4, I think that's how you say it. But what it does that's really cool, and I learned this, is it can help reduce cellular excitotoxicity by plugging what's called the NMDA receptors. So the way I think about this is just like a barrier system, you've got a cell, and in the cell, you've got these little receptors known as NMDA receptors. I believe it's N-methyl D-aspartate receptors. And those allow the influx of certain neurochemicals. Now, what can happen in a brain injury is too much calcium can go and dump into the cell and create cellular excitotoxicity. So what magnesium does is it sits as basically like a bouncer in the NMDA receptor, and it does not allow cellular excitotoxic neurotransmitters or chemicals to get into the cell. So it acts as a bouncer for the cell. And when that happens, if you can protect the cell with magnesium, then you can promote cellular healing, cellular growth, and reduce inflammation. And it also helps the maintenance of the integrity of the blood-brain barrier and reduce brain edema. So magnesium is great. Magtine, something that's recently discovered. I take magnesium L-threonate. There's lots of different ones out there. I typically take the recommended. It has an effect on me. There's not a lot of supplements that I feel when I take them actually like change my brain, but magnesium L-threonate is one of them that I feel like I get way more restorative sleep, and I am able to remember my dreams better, which might sound weird to people, but I used to be a very light sleeper, and now whenever I sleep pretty hard. But with magnesium L-threonate, it's kind of a different sleep. And I wake up and I feel very alert and awake and refreshed. I personally don't take it every night. I will take it like every other night, but it's a great supplement. I really do like magnesium L-threonate. I also take it because I have sore muscles and I'm getting old, but it's great for you. Okay, so where do we start? So the biggest thing is, well, we talked about sleep, right? To promote glymphatic function, sleeping on your right side, and then also to promote neuroplasticity. The brain does not change without rest. So either being able to work hard, take a break, get some rest, and then also at the end of the day, making sure that you're engaging in positive sleep hygiene practices, beginning of the day and end of the day. Sleep is non-negotiable. It helps reduce inflammation in the brain and it helps build neurons. The second thing is we have to remove the non-helpers. Those are the inflammatory foods, the processed foods, the bad oils, the foods that are high in sugar, alcohol, things like that that are going to further drive inflammation and barrier breakdown. Those have to be removed from the diet. That might be one of the hardest things for people because we are creatures of habit. Like I live in the South. Uh, Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A, if you go through a Chick-fil-A drive-through, they don't even have like a menu. They just assume that you already know exactly what's on the menu and what you want. You're just supposed to like tell the person. So I remember like I was the weird one because we went through and he was like, "What do you want?" I'm like, "Well, where's the menu?" And I guess you have to like look at it in front. Anyways, stuff like that is not good for your body or for your brain. So you have to avoid that stuff. Number two is hydrate, preferably with electrolytes. I posted about this before. I use a company, LMNT. There's lots of different salt companies out there, but I do water and salt together mostly because I enjoy running every day. I try to get a really good sweat in, and I'm naturally a sweaty person. So I hydrate with electrolytes. Hydrating first thing in the morning because our brains become dehydrated at night before drinking coffee, which caffeine can further dehydrate you, is one of the best ways to start the hydration process. First thing in the morning when you wake up, hydrate, preferably with electrolytes. That was actually Tom Brady's thing. He's like, you know how I won all these championships? I drank water first thing in the morning. I don't know if that was the case, but number three is reverse the energy crisis. If you haven't thought about creatine, it's worth looking into. Creatine can help not only support your muscles, but really help support the brain. The dose is dependent on the patient. So that's something that it would be important to discuss with your practitioner about. Put out the fire and reduce inflammation by eating things like foods that are dietary polyphenols, foods that are high in anti-inflammatory mechanisms. So like we mentioned, the omegas and things of that nature. You have to support the gut. And the reason for that is if you have intestinal permeability after a brain injury, which I'm convinced almost everyone does, if your barrier system continues to break down by the foods that you eat and you're not supporting the gut, it's going to be hard to heal. So you have to reduce inflammation and then you have to really support the gut and then supplement the brain. Now, when I wrote this, I realized, okay, like, do we do this first or this second or third? And all these are typically done together, just FYI. So what you're doing is if there's a brain injury that's occurred, first thing to think about is getting all the bad foods out of the way. The next thing to think about is making sure that every day you're hydrated. So I've read papers that say between like 60 to 80 to 100 ounces of water a day with electrolytes sprinkled in there. Reversing the energy crisis by taking creatine through diet and then supplementing through creatine every day. Reducing inflammation by incorporating supplements and foods that are going to promote anti-inflammatory pathways like the omegas. Supporting the gut, bone broth, increasing foods that are rich in glutamine, pre and probiotics, a probiotic supplement, and then also supporting the brain. So it seems like a lot, but I'm never one to say, oh, you have to be on 100 supplements. I don't think that's the right way to do things. It has to start with your habits. So you have to stop eating the bad foods, start eating the good foods, and bring in a few supplements to help make positive changes to the body and to the brain. Okay. And then I said, because I didn't, like I mentioned at the beginning of this, for specific supplement recommendations, you can email our office if you're like looking at one that you're interested in. We're not going to spam you. I'll answer your email, or you could just message me on the Facebook page. These are my resources. There were several. If you don't know Andrew Huberman, highly recommend listening to him. His most recent podcast was with David Goggins. I don't know. He's at first he's got a very foul mouth, so it was hard to like listen to David Goggins at first, but then I listened to his audiobook when I was running, and I'm just blown away by that guy. I mean, the how he turned his whole life around, his story is really neat and he's very inspiring. So he's just got some great people that come on his podcast. There's some great websites I recommend checking out. Healthline, Very Well Health is a great website and they always provide resources. So it's always reviewed by like a PhD or an MD, all the information on there. Those are worth checking out. The rest of these are just the research papers. I got one of the images from this really great website here about magnesium L-threonate. And Medical News Today is a great website just to check out. I subscribe to their email, and I don't read every single thing that comes through, but like they had a really good article on lion's mane that I was interested in, so worth checking out. Okay, shout out. I wanted to give a shout out. I gave a shout out to Kevin last time, but his book is great. I highly recommend it. Kevin's story, he had a very severe traumatic brain injury, a diffuse axonal injury in 2011. And if you're looking for nutritional resources, he's got a website called feedabrain.com. This book is a great resource. And he's got really good information in there. He has a little forward from Dr. David Perlmutter, who's a neurologist, I believe. So it's a great book. It's worth checking out. Thanks so much. I forgot to change this slide. So the next workshop is going to be in a month, and I am going to be talking about the foundation. So now that we've got the non-negotiables out of the way, we'll be talking about the foundations. And then for more information, you can email our office. This is my new Instagram page, and really appreciate your time. So I'm going to stop the recording and then I'll answer some questions. Thanks, everyone.